Well, last year Sir Philip Green appeared at a joint hearing of the Work and Pension Select Committee and the Business Select Committee to give his account of BHS's downfall. It proved to be a pretty memorable appearance.
Do you remember what you were doing on the 26th of January 2010 at 11 o'clock in the morning? You must have been a mind reader in your previous life. Were you? Which bit of don't remember is difficult for you to listen to? I'm sorry, are we in the same room? Could you, sir, do you mind not looking at me like that all the time? It's really disturbing.
What blocked the deal between Sports Direct and BHS, do you know?
Yeah. One of these.
Well, the chairman of both of those committees, Iain Wright and Frank Field, are now in our Westminster studio. Iain, let me start with you. Is this a good outcome for BHS pensioners?
I think it is welcome. I think it's a milestone in this sorry tale where many people, ordinary, decent working people, have been dealt a heavy blow. The principle has to be that BHS pensioners, all 20,000 of them, are not made worse off by this scheme. And Sir Philip seems to have been starting to right the wrongs that, let's face facts, he himself put in place when he extracted hundreds of millions of pounds in the forms of dividends and the form of other charges in BHS during his time of ownership.
But he said to you when he appeared in front of you, he said, I am going to sort it. A lot of people were sceptical that he would. He has done. He's put his hand in his pocket. He's actually put in a lot more money than a lot of people thought he would do. Is it time to give Sir Philip Green a bit of credit?
Well, let's not put the bunting out just yet. Let's not crack open the bottle of champagne, because the key point will be at the level of scrutiny and detail. It sounds a welcome step. It's an important milestone. But also in terms of if you're a very young pensioner from BHS, Iain, it could be that in terms of the indexation, the way that your pension entitlement goes up in accordance with the cost of living, that you could be quite significantly worse off, and that will need looking at quite closely.
Although he has put in this inflation proofing of 1.8%, Iain, that looks pretty generous compared with the current rate of inflation.
But speaking to the pensions regulator, there is a chance that, as I said, if you're a young pensioner here and that you could be drawing down on your pension for a considerable number of years, the gap between what you might have expected in the present deal and the gap with what you might have had under BHS could be significant. Now, I hope that's not the case, but I think it's a risk to be identified and mitigated, and certainly I know Frank's committee will want to look at this too.
Well, Frank, let's bring you in at this point. I mean, you've said that this isn't, there are not issues which are not solved by this, which we will obviously be looking at, and the courts and everyone else will be. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that this is, as Iain was saying, a milestone, an important one, but pensioners won't get the pension increase they thought they would get, but they will all be starting at the pension rate that they thought they believed and they had actually paid in for. That's that's a totally different situation to what we had when we had Sir Philip before the committee. It's a success for the pension regulator. She hasn't dealt in these big figures before, and it's a success there. But the Prime Minister, before she thinks about any knighthood or anything like that, knows that there's 4 major reports to come in, and Iain was touching on those. I mean, the revenue is looking into Dominic Chappell. I believe actually has arrested him and obviously released him, but there's serious charges they're looking at there. There's the Serious Fraud Office, there's the liquidator, and so on. And at the end of the day, we'll have a fuller picture about what went wrong and who dragged down BHS. Sorry.
Frank, you've mentioned Dominic Chappell's position there. Now, of course, the regulator has now dropped all enforcement action against Sir Philip. She still has enforcement action in place against Dominic Chappell. I mean, do you think the authorities have gone far enough yet to bring Dominic Chappell to book?
No, and I think by bringing him to book, whether it's through the regulator and thereby through the courts, or it's by the revenue through the courts, then in fact we will have, we might begin to see or understand much more of this story. But I know Iain's committee is taking this forward in that the Prime Minister is really keen on what are the lessons for corporate governments, the running of firms, the way people are treated, their pension entitlements and so on. And both Iain and I have written to the Prime Minister to say, here's a report we've done, the lessons we've drawn for private companies, the governance of large private companies, who are often, we now discover, more important than many, many, many public companies. And we're hoping that she's going to chair a meeting at Downing Street with the really good examples of those who run private companies, thinking about their workers, their pensioners, as well as their shareholders and consumers, and to start to lay down rules so that other parts of Sir Philip Green's empire, like Arcadia, and other companies where there are problems, will have to be enforced to adopt the best practice.
OK, well, we'll be discussing Arcadia later in the programme. But Iain Wright, we had the Pensions Green Paper last week. It looked like the government was backing down from giving the pensions regulator real teeth to block mergers and acquisitions. Do you believe that's a mistake?
Frank will know more about the Pensions Green Paper than I do, chairing the Work and Pensions Committee. In terms of Green Papers, the Prime Minister launched a couple of weeks ago the Corporate Governance Green Paper, where she'd been previously talking about workers on boards and other things to improve the decision-making process of companies in our country. She seems to have backed down significantly on large parts of that, and Frank's absolutely right. In terms of many private companies that are not listed on the stock exchange, they are massive. They're massive employers, and have large numbers of pensions as well. And they shouldn't be able to escape any sort of regulatory environment that tries to protect not just shareholders, but pensioners and employees too.
So you think the Prime Minister's been nobbled by the interests of big business then, Iain?
I think you'll have to ask the Prime Minister when you interview her next, Iain. But what we want to do on the BEIS Select Committee is look at corporate governance. We're coming to the end of our inquiry now. We've been looking at things like executive pay, on the responsibilities and duties of directors, because Frank's absolutely right. When we looked into BHS and the manner in which it was sold, the level of corporate governance was absolutely appalling. The chair of the parent company wasn't even present at the meeting when it was decided to sell BHS. It was all a fiefdom designed to help Sir Philip Green rather than think about the pensioners and the employees. And if we'd had proper stringent corporate governance reporting requirements in place, perhaps this sorry tale might not have happened.
Does that mean you think some of the other BHS directors, the likes of Karen Brady, people who have places on Philip Green's boards, they still have questions to answer then?
There's an important part of the Companies Act legislation. It's called Section 172, and it deals with directors' duties, that in terms of directors have to think about wider stakeholders and not just the shareholders. I think it's very difficult to see how Section 172 was adhered to during the tale of BHS. Now, no one's ever been prosecuted through Section 172, and I think we have to consider, well, why is that the case? Now, there might be reasons like judges don't want to get into the heads of directors. It could be just bad business mistakes rather than something perhaps more malevolent or deliberate. But certainly Section 172 is an important piece of the statute book, but is it being applied as much as it should be?
One last question to you, Frank Field. Do you think after all this Sir Philip deserves to keep his knighthood?
I think that's out of my hands. The House of Commons has voted unanimously that he should lose it. But a key player here will be the Prime Minister, who wants to consider those 4 reports, which are still to come in. She's always careful in making these decisions. But I also know that if she gets this one wrong, people will feel that those statements she's made up to now, that she's on their side, not on the side of the old establishment, will ring pretty hollow. I'm really pleased that Sir Philip has made this settlement today, but he's done himself untold damage in stringing it out in this way. And I've never, in my whole political life, been stopped in the street and people express such hatred for a figure as they do Philip Green. And it's appalling that he's subjected the pensioners to what he's subjected to them, the loss of jobs, which could have been unnecessary, as Iain was saying, and he's lost his reputation as well.
All right. Frank Field,
we've got to leave it there. Small.
All right. Frank Field, Iain Wright, thanks both. Thanks for joining me.